Welcome to NSTA Web Seminars, where you can find live interactive learning at your desktop. Today's seminar is part of our NGSS Web Seminar series, and it is titled The Nature of Science in NGSS. Our presenter's name is Dr. Norman G. Lederman. My name is Sue Hokinen, and I will be moderating today's program. Jeff Lehman is also online with us today to provide technical support. I want to remind you to visit the NSTA Learning Center, your online portal for professional learning with over 11,600 resources for science educators. You will find that over 4,000 of those resources are free, and you can add them to your library to access when it's convenient for you. You can organize your resources by bundling them into collections or access thousands of other collections made by the NSTA and other teachers just like you. Join the conversations in the community forums where you can discuss content and classroom issues with other teachers, and the online advisors are available to help you find the information you are looking for. You can also use our free tools to help you organize your own professional development to help you meet your teaching and learning goals. And it's all available at learningcenter.nsta.org. And with that, I would like to present today's presenters. With us today is Ted Willard. He is the director of the NGSS at NSTA with the National Science Teacher Association, and Dr. Norman G. Lederman, who is a distinguished professor of mathematics and science education at the Illinois Institute of Technology. Gentlemen, let's start with Ted, and we'll pull forward from there. And remember, if you need me for anything, please don't hesitate to ask.
Great. Thanks very much, Sue. Welcome, everybody. Really excited to be here in this summer series that we're doing. And so we're going to start with just a little quick overview of the standards. A lot of it, I'm assuming, will be just information you're already familiar with, but we'll get you in the mood, if you've been spending some time at the beach or something and not focused on science education, although we all know we read about science education at the beach. Okay, so the standards themselves in NGSS were developed and had 4 organizations that were involved in working on them: the National Academies, Achieve, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and my personal favorite, obviously, is NSTA. And there was a 2-step process that was involved here. We had the development of the framework, which then led to the standards, and then the various elements of instruction all derive from the standards themselves. I think we'll look at the first piece here, looking at the framework itself. And I'm hoping you're familiar with it. If you're not, there's really no excuse. There's a free PDF you can get from National Academies of Press. If you're someone who likes to hold it in your hand, be able to highlight, underline things, you can get a copy from the NSTA store. But the main points of the framework is this idea of 3-dimensional learning. And the 3 dimensions described in the framework are the science and engineering practices, cross-cutting concepts, and the disciplinary core ideas. And I'll go into just a little bit more detail about those 3 different pieces. So here are some examples of the practices, things like developing and using models, analyzing and interpreting data, constructing explanations. These are the things that we want our students to engage in when they are in the science classroom. This is the way that scientists and engineers themselves go about their work. And we want students to be focused on these approaches to improve their understanding of the world around them, to be able to investigate and explain phenomena, to be able to solve problems in engineering. The next piece here are the cross-cutting concepts, patterns, cause and effect, systems. These are concepts that aren't particular to one specific discipline, but cut across all of the various disciplines and are used in physics and chemistry and biology and geology, all the different elements that play around that scientists that use. And then finally, we have the disciplinary core ideas themselves, the things that we're probably most familiar with. It's life science, physical science, earth and space science, and then something that some standards have not paid attention to, engineering and technology. But in NGSS, all of these, engineering itself is a core idea alongside some of the main science ideas that we've got. And the disciplinary core ideas, each of them breaks down into further details, as you can see in these columns here. And so all of those pieces were described at the framework. And then it was the work of the standards to try to operationalize them, give a piece of how we would use those in K-12 education. And so the first piece about all of this was the work of a group of 26 states, all the states in blue here, that worked on the standards. The standards were also the result of a group of writers, 40 some odd writers, spread across the United States. You can see those. So this was really a national effort to develop these standards. And at this point in time, we have 12 states and the District of Columbia. Just a few weeks ago, we had New Jersey join the set. And so we're at a point now that almost 3 in 10 students live in a state where NGSS has been adopted. And as I'm sure you're all aware, those of you who are from states that have not yet chosen to adopt, they are still being used in a number of states in terms of ways to plan and carry out the curriculum and a new approach to education, combining these 3 dimensions together. And so let's take a look at a performance expectation and really get a sense of how those pieces play out. We have this one piece here of develop molecular models of reactants and products to support the explanation that atoms, and therefore mass, are conserved in chemical reactions. And I want to note here that this performance expectation we're talking about describes what is to be assessed at the end of instruction. This is not directive to you as a classroom teacher of what you need your students to do in the class. You still have total freedom to select and plan out how you want it. But you should be working to get to the point where your students at the end of instruction have the ability to engage in this performance. And if they're able to do that, you'll see here how the science and engineering practices come into play here, so we can develop molecular models to support an explanation, and that's described down here. That it deals with ideas of reactants and products, and atoms and mass being conserved in a chemical reaction. And this is a concept that's covered in the disciplinary core ideas. And then finally, that matter is conserved because atoms are conserved, this idea of energy and matter that is a cross-cutting concept. And so all the elements in this foundation box here are tied into this idea. But particularly interesting for us today is also to note that there is a connection to the nature of science touched on here. And this is really where we start to look at what we're doing today as we pass off. I'm going to pass off now to Norm and give you some sense of the nature of science in NGSS. And so on to you, Norm.
Thank you, Ted, and welcome everybody. I'm hoping you can hear me. Let us know if you can't. But I would like to thank Ted again and NSTA for inviting me to this webinar. I think it's very important that as much as possible we as a professional organization can work with teachers to help them understand the NGSS and to help implement it in the classroom. So my goal here is to do several things. First, I'll give you some background on nature of science. That phrase has been around for a very long time, and there's a lot of confusion about it, so hopefully I can relieve some of that today. Then I'll talk about nature of science and where it fits in with NGSS. Then I'll go over some of the research on teaching of nature of science, and that research base goes back about 60 years now, so we do have a lot of empirical evidence about what may or may not work. And then I'll provide some teaching examples that are all classroom tested, and also give you a reference to places where you can get more examples. I will try and answer all the questions that anybody may have. I'm getting a message that my mic is a little choppy, so I just adjusted it a little bit. Hopefully that will help. Okay, now people can hear much better, so it must have been away from my mouth or something. But that's a general organization of the seminar. At various times, I may ask you some questions and we'll take a poll, or I have a specified question, and then I'm planning on leaving about 15 minutes at the end for any questions that anybody may have. And as well as, please feel free to contact me at any time. My email is on the screen right now. It'll be up again later. and you're not bothering me. I love this stuff. I live this stuff. So anything I can do to help, that's fine with me. Okay, so with that, you may, at the beginning of the year, no matter what you're teaching, biology, chemistry, physics, earth science, general science class, you might ask your kids what science actually is, which is an easy question to ask, not so easy to answer. What is on your screen is on the rotunda or the ceiling of the building for the National Academies of Sciences in Washington, D.C. The building was built in 1934. We don't know who we can attribute this quote to, and so we don't know if it's 1934 or many years earlier than that. And just to test out the system, I'd like Sue to do a poll right now to see how many of you agree mostly with this definition.
Okay, so what I've done is I've posted, you'll see underneath your name at the very top, there's a check mark. Go ahead and tab over that, and you should see a green check or a red X. Give us a green check if you agree. Give us a red X if you do not agree. And then we have approximately 250 people in the room, which is an excellent turnout. So we'll just keep watching these numbers go up, and you can begin whenever you're ready.
Okay. Okay, let's close that poll off for now because we got pretty much a large group there. Okay. Now the next quote I'll put up. It looks like 145 people agree with that. 22 did not agree with it. The next quote is a personal conversation I had with a paleobiologist by the name of Arthur Bucco. This is when I was working at Oregon State for many years. He's about the level of what Stephen Jay Gould was at, although he did not write any books for the popular media. Here's his answer to this question. So, Sue, I'd like you to do a poll on this one to see who agrees and who disagrees.
Okay, so what I've done is I've put the check mark visible again. So if you agree, go ahead and select the green check. If you do not agree, select the red X. And we can see the numbers. Excellent. And just let me know when you want me to stop it again.
Nobody likes this. Okay, you can stop it now. Okay, is it stopped?
Yes, it is stopped. Sorry. Yes, I did. I locked their responses so that the numbers are still there. Okay,
so most people like this first quote, and this is actually a question I ask in professional development and methods classes, and the discussion usually ends up getting around this revealer of nature's laws, eternal guide to truth, and what exactly that might mean. And in Bucco's, people fixate immediately on this lies portion. Let me test this just to see. I'm trying to see if my pointer works, but it doesn't seem to work. What am I doing wrong?
It can be kind of finicky for me also.
Okay.
You just kind of want to hold on to it and not give up on it.
Okay, so I'll keep it there. But the word lies in there. Now, Bucco is he likes to cause trouble. He's kind of like me, tries to be provocative. There's a hand coming up there. And, okay, lies is going that way, so someone did that. But he doesn't really mean lies. What he was trying to say was that scientists don't know anything for sure. They take the data they have and they come up with inferences to explain the universe. So that may be a little bit more palatable, but then we start a conversation of, does science actually come up with absolute truth, or is it truth at the moment which may change? Which does relate to what I'll talk about with respect to nature of science. So on to the next slide. Probably a better answer to that question in either of those quotes that you might use in a class or what I do with teachers. There is a body of knowledge in science, and this is what largely fills our textbooks, our curriculum maps. There's certainly disciplinary core ideas in the NGSS, all the concepts, theories, laws, ideas, etc. that we spend a lot of time in our science classes. In the recent reforms, and certainly in NGSS, we're looking for more of a balance with these two other things, science practices, what sometimes is called inquiry, but how is the knowledge developed? How is it disciplinary core ideas? Where do they come from? And that's how scientists do their work. And the last one, nature of science, which really focuses on the characteristics of the knowledge which are inherently derived from the science practices. The way we develop knowledge in science has implications for the knowledge that we currently agree upon that becomes part of that disciplinary core idea set. So those are the three things that I would use to answer that question, what is science? Okay. Now, science practices, just briefly, because we're going to talk about nature of science, is used in a variety of ways, and it's been confusing over the years. We've been very interested in what was originally called scientific inquiry, and now we've expanded it to science practices. And there's a lot of confusion about that. In the last set of standards, there was a separate book just on science inquiry. In the recent publications from NSTA for NGSS, there's further discussion about why do we have science practices, what happened to inquiry, what do science practices mean. In some instances, it's a teaching approach that most reform documents say is a preferred way to teach science, putting students in situations where they're asking questions, collecting data, analyzing the data, and drawing conclusions. But in addition to that, there are instructional outcomes, things we want our students to know and learn. The first one is performance, and that is to a large degree what you see in the science practices. What should students be able to do? And we'll get to that in a moment. We want them to do close approximations of what scientists do when they develop knowledge. And then there's knowledge about inquiry, about practices. We don't want students just to be able to do things. We want them to have a knowledge about what they did. We want them to know things like there's no single scientific method, because they'll do a variety of investigations. So these are three different ways in which practices can be used or inquiry can be used, and it's very important when you're talking about practices or inquiry that everybody is on the same page. And this even differs from country to country. I think we have are there any questions from the audience at this point?
I haven't noticed anything specific to the nature of science, although there was a question that we can come back to later regarding the NGSS as a whole, unless you wanted to address that one. And it's from Carol, and it just says, are all core ideas required to be taught to all students? Well,
the core ideas, of course, is a progression all the way from kindergarten to high school, and the intent, as I understand it, is that's our goal, is to have students know all those things that are laid out in NGSS. There's certainly going to have to be some modifications based upon students with special needs, students from certain areas, and but that's something we're going to need to work out as we start to implement the goal and vision of NGSS.
Thank you. And if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat area now. Okay, so would you consider, and it's going to scroll away from me before I grab it, would you consider cross-cutting concepts to be a part of the body of knowledge?
I would. It's separated because those are kind of transcendent ideas that cross all the science disciplines. but I think that's as much a body of knowledge as the disciplinary core ideas, which are very specific to the different disciplines. So in my mind, I view those as equally important. Definitely the cross-cutting ideas are critical to the vision of NGSS in terms of the integration of these three different aspects, these three different dimensions.
Very good, and this is a question I'm definitely interested in hearing also. Tommy asked, can you summarize how the definition of, and I'm assuming, and correct me Tommy in the chat if I'm not correct, the nature of science or the definition of science itself might vary internationally, and what are the extremes in the definition?
Okay, so the extremes that I see in my work, and I pretty much go everywhere except Antarctica, is on one hand, people really focus on some of the things I'm talking to you about today, which is characteristics of scientific knowledge, like it's subject to change, it's not totally objective, it's empirically based. On the other hand, there are places that have never really distinguished between nature of science and scientific inquiry or science practices, meaning they have not separated under that label nature of science, the doing of science. The two are very intimately related. The characteristics of the knowledge or nature of science is derived from how we develop knowledge. But we can talk about them separately, but they all obviously are intertwined. And so those would be the extremes where, and what happens is when it's not separated at all from inquiry or practices, what gets lost are the ideas about nature of science, and we tend to focus totally on what students are going to do. And you don't do nature of science, it's a reflective understanding of what you have done.
Very good, and I think that's a great lead into this next question, and that is, could you clarify how the newer term science practices is different from science inquiry?
Okay, so in the past what happened and continues to happen with science inquiry, scientific inquiry, is people tend to focus on science process, observing, analyzing, asking questions, and they do it in a way that very often becomes free of content. So they're just like process skills, and science practices never separates the doing of these things, doing of science, from the content that it is asking questions about, from the context that the questions are being asked about. So I think very often in the past, inquiry was used incorrectly, especially in a lot of elementary curricula, where kids would just spend a lot of time observing, but they never learned what they were observing, anything about what they were observing. They just became good observers. The practices would not, in a very strong way, advocate anything like that, and it would never separate the observing from the content that you're observing for and the content you're observing. So people, in my mind, in the past have misused inquiry. It has many, many different definitions, and so the NGSS has a new word, a new phrase, and it gives the opportunity to rephrase what we really meant by what do scientists do. They do it for a reason, a purpose, to learn about the natural world, and it's never devoid of content.
Very good. In the interest of time, I'm gonna go ahead and.
I was going to say that.
Yeah. Oh no, it's perfect. I'm going to continue to gather questions, so please continue to type them into the chat area. But you have a tremendous wealth of information and knowledge to share with us, and I don't want to miss any of it.
Okay. So here are the practices that you can see listed from the NGSS. I call these all the verbs, the doing of science that students are asking, developing, planning, analyzing, using mathematics, computational thinking, constructing explanations, and something very important, they're engaging in argument and evidence. They are coming up with conclusions and having to defend their conclusions with the data and the evidence that they have collected in one form or another. And they're evaluating and they're communicating information. So in a nutshell, these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, these 8 things basically are characterizing what it is that scientists do in their practice. And that's where the word practice comes from. I call these the verbs because this is just the doing, and I think that science practices under the guise of nature of science also want students to understand something about what's listed under these verbs. And I'll get to that on the next slide or pretty soon. Nature of science, historically, and this is, a lot of people have been involved in this. Historians of science, philosophers, science educators have defined nature of science as the characteristics of scientific knowledge that are necessarily derived from how the knowledge is produced. It originally was called Nature of Scientific Knowledge in the 60s and 70s, and somewhere in the 80s the knowledge got dropped off and just became Nature of Science. And that may, of course, some of the confusion about whether nature of science was about the knowledge or doing of science. So what do these things mean? In the NGSS, here are the 8 things referring to nature of science. And this is knowledge about rather than things you're doing. We want students to know that investigations use a variety of methods. And that would mean there is no single scientific method. We want students to know investigations use a variety of processes that scientists do, observations, inference, and so on. But we also want them to realize that there's no single set of steps, like is on page 5 in your textbook, that all scientific investigations must follow, otherwise it's not science. And indeed, most of the investigations that your students do over the course of a year do not follow the scientific method. If there's anything your students know coming into your class, it's that scientific knowledge is empirically based. They probably don't know the word empirical, but they know that scientists collect data. Whether they know what data is or not, that's debatable. But they know that scientists look at the world, they collect something, and it's not just scientific if I think something is the case. You can't just think of an explanation, you must have some evidence for it. The knowledge is open to revision. All scientific knowledge is subject to change. I usually use the word tentative, not to mean that it's very shaky, but science, over the history of science, what we think often changes due to new evidence becoming available through the advancement of technology or research, but also sometimes scientists will look at the same data in a different way and come up with a new conclusion about how things work. Linus Pauling and Watson and Crick were looking at the same data, but they looked at the structure of DNA very differently from each other, even though they were looking at the same data. And that happens all the time. Probably most recently with this debate, which I hope goes away, about global climate change. Is it global warming, or is it the Earth getting colder? In Chicago, it's getting colder. So global warming is not at the top of everybody's mind here, but I think we've got that one under the rugs. Scientists use models, laws, mechanisms, theories to explain natural phenomena. Students don't typically know what a law is versus what a theory is, and they certainly don't typically know what models are. So this is a strong emphasis within NGSS. Science as a way of knowing is a little vague, and I'll elaborate on that in a bit when I get more specific. But science is a way of knowing the world, different than history, different than religion, different than art, not necessarily better, but a different way of knowing about the world. Knowledge of science assumes that there's some kind of consistent order in our natural systems, rather than chaos. Although there is a science of chaos that exists. Science as a human endeavor is also a bit vague, and it means a lot more than humans do science. But because humans do science, that has implications for the nature of that knowledge that the humans produce. And finally, science addresses questions about the natural and material world. It doesn't just ask questions about everything like, why am I here and what is my purpose in life? But it strives for an understanding of the natural world. Okay, in the NGSS, and Ted already referred to some of this, within science and engineering practices and within the cross-cutting concepts, you will see connections to nature of science in both of those. And what I like about the visual portrayal is that it really pushes the idea that nature of science is integrated into these other dimensions. It's not a separate pullout that you, at the beginning of the year, have a unit and then you forget it forever, but it's something you should be addressing at various times when it's appropriate while you're teaching your science. Just like when you're teaching your core ideas, there should be some integration with cross-cutting concepts and science and engineering practices, and the connections are pretty well lined out, those 8 things I talked about, where it makes the most sense, and there are certainly other areas beyond that. Roger Bybee, in a recent book that's published by NSTA, does a really good job of showing how to address nature of science within the NGSS. Okay, I'm calling this a little bit of an in-depth perspective only because it makes, I think, a little bit more concrete some of the things on that previous list about science being a human endeavor or science being a way of knowing. Subject to change and tentativeness was there very directly. Because human beings do science, there's a lot of creativity involved in putting together scientific models, in putting together scientific theories. That creativity is the function of individuals. Now I'm trying to use this thing and I'm not doing it right, but I will. Let's see. I'm trying to use the finger again.
If you see it, what you need to do is make sure you have your
I got it. Okay.
The mouse.
Got it.
Make sure you're pressing.
I got it now.
Oh.
I got it. So because humans do science, there's creativity involved in the development of that knowledge. There's also some subjectivity. And by subjectivity, I'm talking about all scientists have different background knowledge, they have different experiences, they have different perspectives and allegiances to various theories and ways of viewing things. This is why scientists often disagree with each other. Subjectivity in this sense is not a bad thing. I'm not saying we want to be subjective, but I'm saying that scientists are humans, and humans can't avoid being humans. So there's some subjectivity in there. And some of the greatest discoveries in the history of science were because one scientist with a tremendous amount of creativity and different individual characteristics put things together in ways that others did not do that. Because of this individual creativity and subjectivity, scientific knowledge changes because other people come along and look at things in different ways. Observation and inference, that's obviously part of science practices. All scientific knowledge involves observing, but we never have all the data, so we have to make some inferences. Okay? There's nothing wrong with an inference as long as it has data to back it up. The functions and relationships of theories and laws, one of the biggest misconceptions that exists in the U.S. and probably around the world is that theories eventually grow up and become laws. Certainly in the U.S., the creation scientists, if you want to call them that, have capitalized on this and say evolution is just a theory, as if it's somehow weak and we don't have to pay attention to it until it becomes a law. But it will never become a law. There are many things in science, like the kinetic molecular theory, which explains the ideal gas laws. Laws talk about or identify relationships among things we observe. Theories are inferred explanations for what we observe. It's the theories that explain our laws. Socially and culturally embedded, science does not occur in a vacuum. This is science is a human endeavor as well as science is a way of knowing. Science affects society. Society affects science. Some people would go as far as saying that there are other sciences other than Western science, but that's a really difficult thing for students through the high school level to really get a good grasp on. And empirically based, that was direct from the other conception of lists of NOS. Science always appeals to data from the natural world. The data doesn't have to be numerical. Empirical doesn't mean numerical. It means we're referring to the empirical world. It can be descriptions, like an ecologist does, or like an astronomer. It doesn't have to be numbers. Okay. Are there any questions?
One I want to address that Matthew brought up in the very beginning, before we get too far away from it. He would like you to comment on a definition that he uses, and that is science is the orderly collection of knowledge.
I would say it's partially correct, because the knowledge that we have is not self-evident. So we're not like, Francis Bacon used to say, and others, that we're not like unexposed film. That's probably antiquated now because no one uses film anymore. But the world presents us with things, and then our mind interprets it and makes sense out of it, and we produce the knowledge. We develop the knowledge. Arthur Bucco said it was a set of lies. The first quote didn't talk about it that way, but it's the difference between data and evidence in a way. Data are the individual things we observe, we measure, and so on. Evidence is data that's been analyzed and thought about and interpreted by the human mind, and then it becomes evidence for, evidence against, or it becomes irrelevant. So what I'd add to that is where it's systematic, but I don't think we're collecting knowledge. I think it's a systematic collection of data that enables us to develop knowledge, is what I would qualify it as.
Okay, thank you. Sean asked, and I think this is kind of important considering that we are referencing this kind of frequently, but what are some examples of non-Western science?
Okay, so a big thing in Africa, especially South Africa, is indigenous knowledge. We, looking at that, would refer to a lot of that as mythology, magic, but they have these very well-developed, systematic, data-based explanations for lightning, for bad luck, and it's a very difficult thing to teach to people from the West because you can't step out of your Western culture. There's indigenous knowledge in New Zealand, especially among some of their native tribes, and indigenous knowledge is big there. There are conferences on indigenous knowledge. The best place we've been successful about teaching about non-Western science has been in South Africa, where they're interested in this, and they actually are required to teach indigenous knowledge in their science classes alongside each other because they don't want to lose their culture. Probably the most recent thing would be different forms of medicine, homeopathic medicine, herbal cures, chiropractic. These are things that we all considered hocus pocus and nonsense, but as soon as science could develop a explanation that was based in Western science, it was okay. Acupuncture was disregarded for many, many years until Western scientists were able to explain how it worked in terms of Western medicine, which was all about neural system gating theory. That was okay then. That wasn't the explanation acupuncture people use, but we often won't consider it science until it fits into our framework. That's a real difficult thing. It was referred to most directly in the benchmarks for science literacy, but that has kind of gone away because it's difficult to really explain to someone educated in a Western culture how other cultures think about things. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Very good. And at this point, I'm going to throw it to Ted to see if there's anything that I missed question-wise. If you notice anything, Ted, and you'd like to ask that question.
I don't see that we've gotten much into this point. I think we probably could move on ahead and save the time for the questions to come up together later.
Perfect.
Okay. So now to the research. What exists out there that may help us teach some of the things that I've been putting up here? And this research has been going on for about 60 years. Margaret Mead did some of the original research in the 1950s. But there are some generalizations that can be reached from the empirical research that's been done. Generally, K through 12 students do not typically possess adequate conceptions of nature or science. I have adequate in quotes because what's considered adequate varies over time. NGSS has a different definition of what's adequate understanding than the National Science Education Standards, than the benchmarks for science literacy. So that changes, but that's true in all content areas. We change what we think is appropriate and not. There's nothing wrong about K through 12 students, but typically people don't teach nature or science within their science classes. I never heard of nature or science until after I had a master's degree in biology. It's not typically taught in college courses. The same is true for K through 12 teachers. They typically do not possess adequate conceptions of nature or science. Not because they can't, it's just because they were never typically asked to learn these things. But they certainly can learn that. I can attest from my own work with teachers, it's not a big problem. The problem is getting people to start thinking about it, and if they don't come to our classes and our workshops, or if I don't see them at NSTA, they're not getting that opportunity. Okay, there's a typo on this next slide. It goes to 4. There is no 3. So you didn't miss something. What the recent research over the last 2 decades is showing is that nature or science is best learned through an explicit instructional approach as opposed to implicit. This does not mean lecture. Lots of times I say this and people think I'm saying lecture to your students, go through that list and have kids memorize each of those bullet points. That's not what I'm saying. What we're saying is after the kids have done some scientific investigations, then have a discussion with them, not just about the results, but why they did what they did, what it means. If all the groups in your class don't come up with the same answer, it doesn't mean someone did something wrong. They may have all done exactly what you said, but they're interpreting things in slightly different ways. And that happens in the scientific community. But the assumption for a very long time, and it still exists in some people, is that if you just have students do science, they will come to understand those 8 things on the NGSS list. And that's not typical. The student doesn't go home and say, you know, Mom, we were in class today, and everybody didn't all get the same answer. I think that's great because we're all different individuals doing science, and we all have different perspectives. Well, I don't need to go on, but you know, that kid's not common, and that kid that does that may be even a little weird. But we need to get kids into discussions about what they did and why they did it. Teachers' conceptions of nature or science are not automatically necessarily translated into classroom practice. So in the workshops and work with teachers that we do, and the research supports this as well, I can teach teachers about nature or science. That doesn't mean they're going to integrate it into their instruction or know how to even do that. So we also work with teachers to show them how do you integrate nature or science into your instruction. The NGSS gives you a roadmap on where to do it, and the book by Bybee and some others and other materials that are coming out, and I know Ted's working on all kinds of resources, will give you more support to facilitate you doing that. You're basically being asked to integrate something that you're maybe not very comfortable or experienced in doing. And so that takes extra time and extra thought. Kids really love it, and it works very in enhanced instruction when your kids know that that picture of the atom on page 6 of the textbook is not something that somebody directly saw, and it's really a model based on data. They have a much fuller understanding of what an atom is versus just memorizing the rings and the subatomic particles. The last one is an assessment issue. Good, I got stuck on the finger here, so this is good. Until nature of science and science practices start showing up on standardized assessments, teachers will not give it the same value as the things that do show up on those assessments. I know the PISA folks are working on including more, but I know the New York State Regents doesn't do such a good job with it. I know in Illinois we do not do a very good job with it. As that becomes more integrated into assessments, teachers respond to that, not in the most negative way that I'm just going to teach to what's on the test, but it's now being valued by others as opposed to just being on the paper. It really means something. It's really important. If, you know, your students will often ask you, is that going to be on the test? And if you say no, they just tune out. And it's the same thing with teachers. If it's something that no one is really assessing, you know, it's a nice thing to do, but you don't really need to do it. Okay. So the assessment is always there. When we work in Taiwan, they have nature or science in their reform documents, but the teachers will always tell us the biggest problem they have is the parents will always ask them, if you take time to do nature or science, will my students still do as well on the national test? Which is very powerful there. And it doesn't really take as much extra time as people think. It really can be integrated well if it's done in the right spots. Okay, so that's what the research generally shows. And any questions about that?
I have not seen any questions posted that have not been addressed. Most of them are just like defining specific words. So if you have questions, I'll encourage them to keep typing them into the chat area, and then you can continue, and I'll bring them back around again. Yeah,
and the chats that I'm seeing out of the corner of my eye all look to be things that I think people are getting what I'm trying to say and supportive of it before I even said it, probably. So, okay. So, just real briefly, some of the common ways that people have tried to teach nature or science, and I'm going to go through this quickly because I think I've already said this, but here's some examples. In the 60s and 70s, it was very popular to have students doing a lot of science, which was good, but it was designed also to teach students about nature or science as well as inquiry. That's the implicit approach because nature or science was never really brought to the forefront or made explicit in the classroom. So the research on all those 60s and 70s curricula that were designed to teach nature or science, what's the one, Project Physics, some of the BSCS materials, and a lot of the alphabet curriculum were effective in a variety of ways, but not with respect to nature or science. They were very good at learning outcomes that were primarily skill-based, the doing of science, because they certainly did have a lot of doing of science. There's a historical approach which gets a lot of airplay, and the historical approach is if students come to an understanding and get a lot of experiences reading about the history of science, they'll understand nature of science. And there are organizations that are all dedicated to this. And the National Science Education Standards recommended this as approach to teaching about nature of science. It didn't really work. It could work if in the historical case studies, teachers also made nature of science explicit. If you don't do that, they'll learn history of science, and they like history of science, and I used to use a lot of it, but they won't come to understand nature of science. What often happens with historical reflection, people believe that everything that we currently understand logically and linearly led to where we are. And if you really look at history of science, a lot of things were going on all over the world, and people were not communicating like they can today, and it wasn't a linear progression. Students can't forget what they know. And when they look at things that people said, like Lamarck years ago, that giraffes have long necks because they had to keep stretching their necks to get to the fruit in the trees, they look at these scientists as being uninformed, or how could they ever think of that? It made sense at the time. It doesn't make sense now. And that often happens, unfortunately. It's hard to get students to suspend their beliefs during any kind of role-play activity. So history of science has been successful with teaching tentativeness, creativity, subjectivity. The creativity and subjectivity tend to be of the scientist, not of the student. That's why I like students doing things and being subjective and being creative and then pointing and showing them that that's what they were. Tentativeness is easy because we can show historical accounts of how things have changed over time. Later on, I'll give you an example of something that actually changed during the time that I've been doing professional development on nature of science. So that's just a teased out thing of what I said the research showed. The explicit approach is what's come about by a lot of work that I do, a lot of my colleagues do. This is work done worldwide, Australia, New Zealand, Israel, so it's not just in North America. Somewhere along the line, students need to reflect upon what they're doing. Nature of science is an objective that you have for your students' learning. It's a cognitive objective. not just something that happens as a byproduct. You plan for it, you assess it, and you look for places to emphasize it within the content and activities you're typically using. I'll give you some examples in a little bit. Okay, and this has been supported fairly consistently by the research. How you can be explicit is still being investigated. There are many ways you can be explicit about nature or science, but it needs to be something that is visualized, not visualized, but talked about in the classroom. Okay, and just a general thing, students won't learn what is not taught. I think I don't need to tell this to this audience, you all know that. Your students will learn some things you did not intend, but if your goal is to maximize your students' learning of nature or science, you should make an effort to include this within your instruction. Okay, questions about that?
I've noticed one question that I think and I know your slides, so I have a feeling you're going to address this, but maybe as a way to introduce it, can you suggest ways in which the nature of science can be specifically included in the curriculum? Okay, so I probably should go to these activities then. Yeah, I like those activities. I'm guessing. I like those activities. Yeah. They're good. Okay, so I get the activities, but again, let's get back to NGSS. They have a roadmap there of where it could be integrated, what content it is connected to, and so it's a reminder for you as a teacher when you're addressing scientific practices, when you're addressing cross-cutting concepts, and also when you're addressing your disciplinary core ideas, there's a little flag that goes up there and says, here's a connection you can make to nature or science. You'll certainly come up with your own. The NGSS is not a complete document that is every possible place, and you're not going to be talking about nature or science every single day, but they're showing you places where you can fit it in, and there are resources that are out there, and certainly new resources that are coming that will show you places and very concrete ways of doing it, which I think is what that question is asking. Okay? Yeah, that sounds good. And I'm going to continue to gather questions, so if you haven't heard your question asked, they can keep typing them. I'm gathering. Half an hour. Okay, so I'm going to go over some teaching examples. If you want more examples, if you go to msed.it.edu and click on Project I Can, there are many different activities, many different examples, many resources. This was an NSF grant that we had, the focus of which was totally on teaching nature or science and knowledge about scientific inquiry at that time. It was done in Chicago. It involved about 280 teachers and over 30,000 students in Chicago, and we were basically working with teachers in the inner city that were dealing with students that were underrepresented and often in schools that were not high achieving. So if anything, it's evidence that you can work with diverse audiences on this, but there are many examples there, and again, if you write to me, we develop them all the time. But I'll give you some teaching examples that I like. I had to pick something to put in here. Some may be a little awkward because we can't do animations very well, and I can't actually have you do something hands-on. I did see somebody that said they used this tube activity out there. This is something we've been using for a long time, and it's been criticized by some, and I'll explain why, but it's a very effective and a very popular activity, and people still use it. This tube, by the way, I actually invented in the early 1980s. It's been used all over the place. Flynn sells it for $20, so I missed out on that because I make no money on it. I have the original tube, but I was using it in a class I was teaching about nature and science. Okay, so I can't actually do this, but if I were to pull this rope here, I would then ask my class, what do you think will happen if I pull this rope? And I get everything from it's going to explode because each end of this thing has rubber stoppers so they can't see inside, to this one will go in and this one will go out. And so
that's what actually happens if I pull this one. The one on the right goes in, the one on the left goes out. Now, if I pull the lower right, the one in the upper left that was out goes in, and this goes out. If I pull the lower left, this goes out, and that goes in. That's about the time I get a lot of, ooh, ooh, people, something unexpected has happened. And then, if I pull the upper right, which is now in at this time, the one that's out here goes up. So, they have a lot of data. I pass this around the room, if I can, to let some students do some other things to it, other than open it up. And then students are asked this question: what's inside the tube to explain the movement of the ropes? And they have handouts, and they work with partners or work by themselves, depending on what they want to do. Okay, and this has been used with first graders all the way through engineering faculty. So it has legs, and I had a student from California. I was doing some workshops in Livermore that wrote to me for 10 years, because I don't always tell people what's on the inside. I'll let you know today. And there's no need to do a, we could do a poll, but let's not do one because I don't know how you'd communicate to me what's inside. But let me show you some student answers. Here's a 4th or 5th grader who's got these little guys in there, or little girls in there. I don't know what they are. Okay, and when this comes up, because you have the students share their ideas, everybody laughs. That's a teachable moment. Why are you laughing? And students will say, because there are no little guys in there. I've never seen a guy that small. You can start getting to the idea that every inference is not okay. They're not of all equal weight. It must be based upon some things we already know. Science builds on itself. And so we can't just, now, 30 years from now, we might see little people that small, but putting little people in there is the same thing as saying the plant turns towards the sun because it knows it needs the sun to make food. And then we quickly try to dismiss that. Here's another one. This is more common, and there will be different configurations based upon how many ropes they think are involved, and so on. And some people have 4 ropes, some people have 2. This one has 3 because there's one going down the middle. And what I then have the students do is, using the inside of toilet paper rolls, you can get those little tubes or paper towels. I usually provide them, or kids can go home and get them. But I was very upset yesterday morning when I saw that one of the toilet paper companies, to be more green, is not going to put that core inside, which is definitely an overt attempt to destroy this activity, because where will we get the tubes? Anyway, but you can do this with shoe boxes and whatever, and they make their tubes. Then we see if their tube works like mine, but then I ask them, if yours works like mine, do you know what's inside mine? And the answer I'm moving towards is, no, they don't. They just know that their model works, and whatever's inside mine works. And right now we have 2 competing models. There are actually 6 different ways that we found out that you could make this thing that are different than the one that I use. And 4 of those came from middle school students in Taiwan. Students are much smarter than we are. They come up with all kinds of things that we haven't even thought about. The way I make it is this. I have a little plastic cord in there. What? Oh, you can't see it. Okay. I use this little ring in here, and the ropes go through the ring. But these ropes can just flap over each other. It works just as easily. If you want to really get involved, you can feel differences in friction based upon whether you use this or the ropes over each other. The key, though, this has been criticized by some people saying, well, that's ropes and tubes. What does that have to do with science? And they're right. And I don't want students going home and their parents saying, "What you do in biology today?" And the kid said, "Oh, we played with ropes and tubes." If I just did this and didn't connect it to science content, that would just be bad teaching. This is connected to, how do we know what an atom looks like when no one's ever seen one? How do we know what the center of the Earth looks like when nobody other than James Mason in the Journey to the Center of the Earth was ever down there? So there's a lot of analogies in science where we have these kind of black boxes where we get some data and we're asked to make inferences based upon the data that we're given. And that's how I get into modeling, because it is a model of some type, and that's the tube activity. So this has worked with people of all ages. I put this, Leon Lederman is at IIT. He doesn't work with us much anymore, but I put this on his desk and asked him about it, and he said, "I know what that is. That's the universe." And that's exactly what it is. You can't open up the universe, but you can't open it up, but you can collect data on it. Okay, so that's the tube. This one we can ask people, what do you see? So can we do, Sue, can we do a quick response on this?
Sure. You want them to just type their responses into the chat?
Yeah. Just type it and I'll try and watch it, yeah. And then I'll cut it off. Tracks, before and after. Really going fast. Well, tracks, footprints. Okay, you can stop it now. Okay, so this is something you can do on a PowerPoint. You could do it on an overhead. I'm still one of those people that still likes overheads. And I ask people what they see. They say tracks. I said, how do you know the tracks? What kind of animals are they? Which direction are they walking in? Are they the same size? All those kinds of questions. Okay, then I'll go to the next slide and ask them, what do you think is happening? And I won't make you tell me what's happening here because that thing scrolled so quickly past me. Most people will say the two are fighting, the two are breeding, one's eating the other, dancing, there's a good one up there, a predator-prey. They don't always say the breeding thing yet, but sometimes they talk about that. They're eating because there's food there. Even in this beginning part, I even sometimes ask them, which one's walking faster? And what does it mean when you go from here to here? And when you talk about walking uphill, downhill, or running. Okay? And then the last one, what's the total story? Okay, so what do you think now? Let me look at people writing that. Predator one, I think I saw mom there, one got eaten, little got eaten, okay, one flew away, okay. So there's all kinds of things. This is a predator-prey thing, one survived. It's a mating thing. We know that some animals eat their mate after they mate, so it's not there. Someone said one of them flew away. It could be all kinds of different things. One response is, this is the mom, sees her baby, puts the baby on her back, carry the other one. I see that from Zara Arzani right now. Could be giving birth backwards. I'm not sure I saw that one, but okay. Very few people ever have said, and I asked the question, how do we know these tracks were put down at the same time? Maybe these two, whatever they are, were never there together. This one comes walking up, sees these tracks, sniffs around for a while, walks away. But this is something that paleobiologists do. They study tracks. They try and draw inferences about what animals these came from, what happened. They don't know any of this for sure. There's been a lot of this in the news way back about dinosaurs living side by side with humans and all that kind of stuff. But none of this follows the scientific method. We didn't control any variables. This is very descriptive, and we're trying to infer what happened during a time we were not there. You can stress empirical evidence on this one. You certainly can stress observation and inference. You certainly can stress tentativeness, because different people will change their mind as we go through the beginning data to more data. Some students will change their mind just hearing what their other students said. Okay? And someone just talked about the dinosaur and the footprints. Okay. This is an old activity called twirlies that I think was written in Science and Children a long time ago. What you can use it for is in a physics class when you're talking about forces and motion, or in a biology class when you're talking about form and function. It mimics maple seeds. If you have maple trees where you live, those things that twirl around when they fall down. But basically, people cut these up. This is a cut right here. This is a fold. These two are folds inward, and this is a fold up. It looks like that when you're finished. Everybody does this. And then I have everybody stand up and drop it. And when it drops it, it twirls around like a helicopter. And so there's two things that I stress. There's the rotation and there's the drop. And we talk about what's causing the rotation. Why does it rotate clockwise versus counterclockwise? Would it go faster or slower if we changed the materials? So I have many of these things that get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. This allows students to develop an investigation to see how changing the structure affects the twirl, affects the rate. They could put paper clips on the bottom here. They could make it out of different grade paper. So they actually do a scientific investigation, and I use that to teach about science practices. Also about nature of science, because some of the things they predict don't come out correct, or what they predicted. Also, I let groups have the freedom to proceed as they want to, so they operationalize the variables different. When I drop the twirly, do I hold it at the top and drop that? Do I hold it in the middle and drop that? So different groups will do their investigation differently. One way versus another is not wrong, but it's important to standardize, because the way you do the investigation can affect the investigation. Okay. Fingerprints. This is one that really integrates math and science very well. Generally, there are three kinds of fingerprints. There's a loop, there's an arch, and there's a whorl. And by the way, the frequency of these in a class is very different in Asia than it is in the US, because the gene pools are different. This is something that is very good during a genetics unit in a biology class, when you're talking about what's inherited and what's not. I have students take a pencil and rub a lot of lead onto a piece of paper. Then I have them roll their finger over that lead so they get a good smear. I then have them take a piece of Scotch tape, put it over their finger. That will transfer the imprint from their finger to the tape. I then have them put the tape on a Post-it note. I have them go to the board, and these three things are on the board separated. They put their Post-it note below whichever type they have, and we have an instant histogram with the frequencies of the different types. We talk about that. We can talk about data analysis. We can quantify this, which is also something in scientific practices. We can talk about the difficulty in categorizing these things, because some of them are on the edge and we're not really sure. Like this one down here, you kind of have something that looks like an arch, and there's the loop over there. So we go on and on with that, and then it can extend to, let's take your family's fingerprints. But if that could be dangerous, let's take your brother's fingerprints. Do you have the same prints on all of your fingers? Are your toe prints the same as your fingerprints? And so you can see this go on and on and on for as far as you want, but you can reflect back on how they did the investigation. And again, This is not an experiment, so you can stress that all investigations do not follow the same set and sequence of steps. We do collect data, so you can stress the empirical. You can stress the tentativeness. It's not good for law and theory, and it's probably not good for social and cultural embeddedness. It could be used for observation and inference if we start making inferences about what's inherited and what's not. This can be used all the way down to the elementary level. I use it at the high school level, and I use it today with a group of 28 teachers from Beijing, China, that were science teachers, to teach them about nature of science. Okay, mystery bones. Great for a biology class. Typically would show up in a unit where we're studying the skeletal system, or a unit where we're looking at form and function, or just doing our survey of animals. What I usually do is the first activity is the infamous owl pellet lab, where we take owl pellets. If you dissect them out, you have all these different bones of the animals that the barn owl ate. Then I have them on a very prescribed sheet tape their bones to the bones on the sheet, so it's very rigid and really cookbookish. Then that's followed by another activity where they get disarticulated skeletons. They use the knowledge that they learned from where the bones fit in skeletal systems of animals that the barn owl ate to bigger or disarticulated bones from cats and rabbits and so on, all of which you can borrow, because you probably don't have enough money, from your local college, because they have these things as sitting on the shelf. And so we now have them really building up some understanding of a skeletal system, where bones are strongest, where they're thickest, where they're thin, and so on. And then the task is, I'm going to give them an envelope which has these bones cut out inside. They're laminated so they can last, and they have to put together the bones. They go ahead and do that, and up to this point I've set them up because all the skeletal systems they've seen are from terrestrial animals, and the disarticulated skeleton is also of terrestrial animals. This happens to be the skeletal system of a animal that flies, and so they end up with some bones they don't know what to do with. So they integrate it in a various place, because they have these extra bones. They'll do things that are not really appropriate, like you can imagine what they do with this bone. Or sometimes they have the animal eating one of the extra bones, but they're told they have all the bones they need. There are none missing. Okay, and then we all share that. We talk about it. They're supposedly using their knowledge of what they know. Then I show them what paleobiologists believe. This is an actual extinct quote-unquote dinosaur or lizard. Its name didn't show up on the slide, but that's what it looks like. These are the bones that the students don't know what to do with because of the framework of the wing. And one student once told one of my colleagues that this is a very old animal because as it gets older it grows its own walking stick. Okay, so we do all this. We talk about how your preconceptions and prior knowledge, there's your subjectivity and some creativity, of guides and affects how you put these things together. Same thing is true of paleobiologists. They've seen a lot of animals, they've seen similar bones, and they start putting things together in the way they think they go. Their job is a lot tougher because they rarely find a full intact bone. It's usually a bone that's been shattered into hundreds of pieces. Okay, and how did they come up with this? We talk about the creativity, we talk about all that. But here's the great thing. A few years ago we had a grant. We were in partnership with the Field Museum in Chicago. And oh, by the way, I jumped ahead. This is what paleobiologists think it looks like. It's a flying reptile. And there's that extra set of bones. And there's what they think it looked like. And it does have, and that's where you can stress creativity and imagination. While we were doing this activity and working with the Field Museum, scientists had changed their mind about where these bones were connected. So it moved from this digit to this digit. And it had to do with structural integrity of the animal they thought they were working with, which they now decided was more like a bird. And there, by the way, there's a scientific name right over here. Okay, but the interesting thing about this is the first conceptualization looked like a flying reptile because we used to believe that dinosaurs evolved into reptiles. The new conceptualization is a bird because we now feel that dinosaurs evolved into birds. The bones are the same. Those are actually the bones of a real animal that once lived. And there's actually a model of one in the Field Museum in Chicago. So this is great for a biology class. It's great to teach empirical, observation, and inference. Certainly tentative, not laws and theories, not culturally and socially embedded, certainly empirical and creativity as well. Okay, and the important point, you can use these things to teach disciplinary core ideas and cross-cutting concepts and things about science practices while you're doing this. So these are not isolated, standalone activities that you don't do in integration with the rest of the NGS vision. Okay, I think I got time. This is another activity where I give students these actual fossil fragments, which is defined as simply part of an animal, and their job is to take the fossil fragment, draw a very detailed diagram of it, and then they have to fill in what the rest of the animal looks like. Here are some examples that kids drew. I won't actually, I plan on doing this, but we're getting close to the end here. The student has this, they have to fill in the rest. And this student, and these are 8th grade students, did that. This piece here was actually a piece of horny coral, but the student is looking at it. Gee, it's got striations here. It looks like the upper beak of a bird. So that makes sense, and they put it there. We talk about students that when they pick up this fossil fragment, did you think you knew what it was right away? And some of them did, and some of them don't. And then we could talk about how did that, you thinking you knew what it was, affect how you feel about the rest of the organism. And it really constrains them because they already pre-decided what it was. So that's something that's really important. Here's another slide. This is also a piece of coral. And this student turned it into part of a leg. It reminded the kid of a chicken leg because it has these little bumps. Like you really look at the skin of a chicken, you see all these little things. Okay? But again, doesn't follow the scientific method. It's empirically based. You can stress observation and inference. You can stress the creativity. You can also stress if kids come up, because some of them will draw a monster. And everybody laughs, and that's because they're drawing something that we've never seen, so that's just not acceptable. Okay. This is a set of cards which is actually sold by Hubbard Scientific, I think. And all students are asked to do here is, and there's many more cards than this, I think there are about 30, organize them in some way. It could be used in a biology class when you're sorting, developing taxonomies and sorting things, or it can be used in a chemistry class where I would use it because it actually models what you do with the periodic table. So students, I'll secretly take one card out, give the class, groups in the class, separate sacks. They put them all out. There's one card missing. They all come up with their own organizational pattern. And then I tell them, there's a card missing. What is that? What does that card look like? What's its color? What's the number on top? What's the number on bottom? How many holes are there, if any? How many, whatever you want to call these divots on the side are there? Okay, and they go ahead and do that. We can talk about classification systems. We talk about patterns. We can talk about models. We talk about tentativeness because people change their whole system once I tell them there's a missing card. And again, this can go on and on. This is supposed to model the periodic table. In the instructions, there's nothing about nature or science. But it's like the tube. It's not just cards and dots and things. This is Mendelev's, in his own handwriting, original periodic table. And it's in Russian, so I'll quickly change it to English because I don't think anybody reads Russian here. And also the thing to notice is that you need to rotate this 90 degrees to look like our periodic table, so hydrogen won't be down there, it'll be up here. He didn't draw it that way. Mendeleev was famous because he was the first one to order the atomic weights, use atomic weights to order the atoms. But he broke his own rule with iodine and tellurium and put tellurium first, even though it was supposed to weigh more than iodine. And that's because of what he knew about some of the chemical reactions that tellurium and iodine had. But Mendeleev didn't know anything about valences and electron shells, but he felt something. Silicon over here was right next to titanium. He crossed out titanium. This group here says doesn't fit. These are the elements he didn't know where to put them. These at the bottom were all the elements, and he checked them off as he put them into the table. Hydrogen was moved from this row to this row. So what the students were doing was exactly what Mendeleev was doing. Nobody picked up a rock and found the periodic table. It was a construction, and Mendeleev actually was asked to teach a chemistry class at a local college, and he was organizing what he knew about the elements for that class. The periodic table was actually his course syllabus or his course lesson plan. Okay, so it does relate. Any questions right now, or should I just finish with the last one?
Let's go ahead and finish, and if they have questions, I'm going to encourage them to type them into the chat,
okay,
and we'll bring them back for the informal Q&A.
Okay, good, because I love this one. In a biology class, and this is where this is, when you get to invertebrates, cold-blooded animals, you have a problem with how many labs you can do. One of the things that we do is take these things called Daphnia and water fleas, whatever you want to call them, and have the kids count the heart rate, because that's just something we can do. And it's about 238 beats a minute. Then we have them put the Daphnia in hot water, not very hot, warmer than room temperature, and colder water, and we see how the heart rate changes. So we can show how cold-blooded animals are affected by the temperature. And we do that. But then we go one step further, and I give them a beaker that says stimulant, one that says water, one that says depressant. And I have them do the same thing. Now the stimulant they assume is going to be very fast, so fast that they're worried they can't keep track of the count. The way they count the 235 is to quickly tap a pencil on a piece of paper so they can keep up. And that's how they do it. Now when they get to the stimulant, when they're really worried and they're going crazy, banging away. The water one, not so bad because they've done that before. And the depressant one, they're happy now because it's not going to be so fast. They come up with the highest one being the stimulant. The water is around 235. Stimulant is about 400. Depressant is about 200. Only one thing is wrong here. Each of these beakers just has water. And I use this to then elaborate further on something called expectancy theory, where what you think is going to happen is what you see. It doesn't mean they're devious or they're dry labbing it, but it means that you need to keep track of what you're expecting and not let that interfere with the data you collected. Again, the human element comes in, especially the subjectivity in this particular activity. Okay, here are the NGSS 8 things again. I think I've shown you how each of these, in one way or another, can be illustrated in some of the activities. tentativeness, empirical, no scientific method. We had some science models. I talked about laws and theories. The human element here, creativity, subjectivity. Science assumes order and consistency, which is what all those patterns are. Human endeavor again, and questions about the natural world. You can integrate these understandings into these activities where they make the most sense. And that's my big message for you to take away today is you need to make explicit these things when the students are reflecting about what you have them do and integrate it into what you're teaching as part of the NGSS. That's the big message. And with that, I'll shut up. I'll say thank you. There's my email address again, and it's now open. And by the way, we have assessments for all of these things in case you're wondering how to assess. Okay? So now I'll open it up. It's all yours, Sue.
Actually, I'm going to throw it back to Ted. Ted, go ahead.
Yeah, and just very quickly, we'll point out we've had some great discussions going on here today and looking for different resources, and I want to just note some of the different pieces we've got here from NSTA. Obviously, you can find the standards at nextgenscience.org, and that all the different elements that NSTA has around the standards, including a special way to look at the standards, can be found on the NGSS at NSTA Hub at this website here. And then I'm going to push us on here to listservs at NSTA has, member-only listserv, and discussion forums on the Learning Center. Those are great places to keep things going there. We've got some upcoming, another web seminar next week, July 29th, that on the equip rubric on evaluating materials. If you like today's web seminar, I hope you can go back and look at some of the other pieces that are here. We've had web seminars on the practices, cross-cutting concepts, core ideas, and assessment of NGSS. We've also had a great number of journal articles that are focusing on different aspects of NGSS. You know, don't just pay attention to what the magazine you've got in your mailbox, but you can go back and look at old issues.
I'll tell Rich.
Yeah. We've got a web seminar, a virtual conference coming up here on Connecting Literacy and Science with NGSS and Common Core. That's on August 6th. A great opportunity for those of you who are interested in thinking about how these two disciplines relate to each other. And this fall, we've got a number of web seminars in place talking about the elementary grades. First one will kick off on September 17th. There will be in the evenings, like we typically do for our web seminars during the school year. Hope to see you all involved in that. Significant number of books in place here. In the NSTA bookstore, people have been talking about some of these pieces during the conference. We've got a nice app about NGSS. You can look at the standards and see the different elements. And our fall conferences are coming up in Richmond, Virginia, Orlando, Florida, and Long Beach, California. And then I'm hoping we'll be heading to Norm's neck of the woods, Chicago, for our national conference in March, and the STEM Forum in Minneapolis next fall. And more conferences down the road next year as well, so hopefully we'll be coming someplace close to you. And with that, I pass things back to Sue.
Thank you, Ted. And before I begin the close, I just want to remind you we are going to have an informal question and answer session after the close. So please hold tight, don't go away. Be patient with me while I go over what I need to go over with you before you depart. Please make sure you fill out the evaluation that we will be giving you a link for. That is how you get credit for your participation. And that is definitely not my picture up there, but that's okay because she's younger than I am and I'll take that. Anyway, I want to thank Ted Willard for his participation today. And if we would like to show our thanks, what you can do is go to the smiley face that's underneath your name at the top. And if you mouse over that, you will see that there is an applause option. We can give Ted a round of applause. And then also give a round of applause to Dr. Lederman for his participation and amazing web seminar. So thank you very much, both of you. I'd also like to thank the Carnegie Corporation of New York for sponsoring today's program. And I'd like to thank the administration of NSTA for their support of web seminars. You can find the resources I'd like to remind you that you can find the resources related to today's presentation by going to the web seminar collection in the NSTA Learning Center, which will include the archive to the web seminar and the presentation slides. This collection may also include journal articles and lesson plans, interactive content modules called Science Objects and Science Packs, and links to helpful websites and multimedia. I'm going to put a direct link to the collection in the chat window. I'm also want everyone who is registered for this program to know that you will receive an email within the next day or so. And please be patient because there's a lot of participants in this particular web seminar. So if you don't receive it in a day or so, you will definitely receive it by the end of the week with access, direct access to this archive and collection. So let me go ahead and find the link for the collection. Give me just a second. Uncooperative mouse. Sorry about that. Okay, and that is a link to the collection. And you can go ahead and bookmark that for later. I'd also encourage you to take a look at some upcoming web seminars, and this is just a few of what's available. We have evaluating resources for the NGSS, the Equip rubric on July 29th. We also have Using the Learning Center as an e-textbook with pre-service teachers on July 31st. And we also have Enhancing Your Content and Pedagogical Knowledge using NSTA Resources Life Science, and that will take place on August 14th. I'd like to thank, you can register for these upcoming programs by visiting learningscenter.nsta.org/webseminars. Thank you, everyone, for your participation today. We look forward to seeing you again on another NSTA web seminar.